Okay, so today I have Mr. Jason Halsey. Am I saying it right?
Yes.
Okay. Director, Campus Recreation at University of North Carolina. I'll read off a little bio, some points. Originally from North Carolina, spent some youth in South Carolina. Graduated from UNC in '96. Masters, Sports Management, App State. Lived in Colorado and was involved with club sports there, and now is back at UNC running the show. Um, Welcome to speaking with me. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your pathway to UNC and what your role entails at the university?
Sure. Well, I graduated from Carolina in 1996. Was a recreational athlete, mainly intramural sports. Had played three sports in high school, didn't want to continue in college. So I turned down an opportunity actually to play football at Davidson College, but wanted to come to Carolina and just experience, going to school and not practicing all the time. And after I left here, I when I went back to graduate school, I was kind of debating. I knew I wanted to go into sports administration, but I didn't think I wanted to work in varsity athletics. I actually thought I was going to be a professor, and that's what led me to Northern Colorado. And I started there, interested in pursuing my PhD. However, I at the same time got an assistantship with the campus recreation department. And for a few years there, I kind of had one foot in the academic world and one foot in the recreation world, and just realized through my experiences that I felt like I was much more effective working with students in kind of the rec sports setting versus in the classroom. So I kind of made the switch and decided to just pursue this full time. At Northern Colorado, I was working with both intramurals and club sports. Had the opportunity in 2007 to come back to Chapel Hill, excuse me, as the sport club director, and did that for 8 or 9 years, and then became the associate director of programs, and did that up until this fall. And I've been in the director's role for about 5 weeks now. So.
All right. So relatively new. So do you oversee intramurals, intercollegiate club sports, and facility element?
At this point, yes, all of that is underneath our campus recreation department.
Okay. Um, no, that's great. I mean, you guys have a pretty vast list of intercollegiate club sports. I mean, that's what I'm really interested in. I mean, because what I'm seeing is that although even to this day, in many cases, the same administrators are running intercollegiate club sports and on campus intramural sports, they're really two different things. I mean, they're very different levels, especially for some sports at some schools. You know, you could be playing, hockey at Liberty or, rugby at Dartmouth or the West Point or something, and that looks very different than once a week 7-on-7 soccer or something like that. I mean, it's almost quasi Division III/NAIA. I mean, the only difference really is that they're paying tuition, but it's still competitive, and you're still representing your university outside of the university versus playing on campus. So that's a lot to deal with. So in your role, do you deal with all the logistics for all the intercollegiate club stuff, starting with like hiring the coaches, scheduling, budget? How much is student driven and how much is institutionally driven?
Sure. So I don't deal with any of that directly anymore, but I can give you a little bit of the history and kind of how our program has evolved, especially since I came back in 2007. When I got back on campus, we've always had about 50 sport clubs and somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,500 athletes. When I came back in 2007, it was very, very much student centered, student focused. There were no coaches. There was limited oversight, very little funding. allocated to the clubs. And I would say in terms of competition based, it was mainly local and regional. So we would play in-state or travel just to surrounding regional states. That kind of shifted when I got here. We, I think, formalized a lot, provided a lot more infrastructure and support, became much more competitive on the national level with a lot of our clubs. However, we did continue to kind of keep that student-focused approach. So we don't have hired coaches. The clubs can contract with coaches specifically, but they're not university employees.
So how much vetting, or if any vetting, is done by you, or is that strictly up to the students themselves to vet their coaches?
So they go through the typical initial, I guess, vetting process, and they find the coach or find someone who's got some mutual interest. They do have to become a certified volunteer with the university, so that requires a background check. There's some limited training that we provide the coaches, and then any stipend or payment is initiated directly between the club and the coaches. Now, I think as the landscape of sport clubs have changed over the years, we do have some coaches that I would consider who are more highly involved with their programs and then also more closely connected with us. Our rowing coach, our hockey coach, our men's and women's ultimate coaches, and men's and women's rugby coaches. All of those are, I would say, coaches that we consider to be more quasi employees, even though they're not technically. We have a lot more contact with them, a lot more interactions. We more meeting times, more communication, all of that type of stuff.
Yeah, those sports specifically seem to be a common theme. Hockey, rowing, ultimate, rugby. I mean, because of demand, but more and more kids playing them. Right. And then some of it because there's kind of an institutional history. I mean, rowing, men's rowing has been around for 140 years. And for whatever reason, is on the men's side, it might be varsity at some schools, but it's not an NCAA sport for men. So therefore, it's pretty institutional. So you can sort of see that happening in those sports. So it's not just you guys, it's many places. So that's good. So I would say all those, and sort of a follow-up, are most of those coaches sticking around? Is the institutional knowledge staying for a lot of these coaches?
I would say we consider ourselves lucky if we get 4 to 5 years from one of those coaches at maybe the higher profile teams. They're still not doing this as a full-time job. They're doing something else. Right. A lot of them are teachers or have day jobs. But we've been pretty fortunate that we've had some success in keeping those coaches. I think the clubs have done a really excellent job of fundraising in order to try to pay the coaches enough to keep them, so they're not having to go out and find additional coaching jobs. I think, but the type of coaches we get are the type of individuals who aren't doing it for the money to start with. They're right. Really here to hone in their coaching skills, to kind of give back to either the university if they went to Carolina, or if they played the sport that they're now coaching. So it's a really a selfless position more than anything.
Has there been any coaches that have gone on though and used that as a springboard? I've seen that a couple times for coaches that have coached at the club collegiate level and then gone to, in some cases, younger but more professional, higher level opportunities. Has that been the case?
Sure. So on our men's rowing coach, we've had 2 previous coaches go on to coach for women's teams at the NCAA level. We've had our men's ultimate coach. He took the coach and general manager position of the Raleigh Flyers, which is in the professional ultimate league.
Yep.
We've had our former women's rugby coach, moved on to become the director of collegiate rugby for USA Rugby. So yeah, we've seen examples of them being able to use their time and their position here as kind of a springboard into something else.
Sure. Yeah, the ultimate seems like it's sort of become like a big thing. I mean, I saw you guys won men and women, correct, this year? And then have won
Back
it
to back.
yeah,
We've
right.
won
Yeah,
men
yeah.
and women's back to back.
And it's gotten some notoriety. I mean, on Twitter, I saw some head honchos retweeting that, and I thought it was pretty cool. Like that was getting noticed. I think it was from the athletic department, and then maybe even some elected types that were retweeting that the ultimate team had won. And then of course, like it's on. I forget what it was streamed. I think it was on ESPN or ESPN3 or one or the other. Um, so
Yeah,
some of
that's
that
been a
stuff, like that's the other thing that's interesting. So I don't know how much you guys have had online in terms of media and again, ESPN is starting to put some of this on ESPN3 or ESPNU. I've seen a whole number of MCLA games, a few ACHA hockey games. It's a couple schools that seem to have a lock on it. Liberty kind of, I don't know how they've sort of weaseled it, not weaseled, but gotten sort of that attention foothold. Have you guys gotten sort of to that place of any teams been able to get that kind of coverage?
Well, definitely our ultimate teams. I think with the success we've had both in the men and women's side, really over the last 7 to 8 years, we've gotten a lot more coverage through ESPN, ESPNU. I would say that's the biggest one for us. We've had a few other ones get some more local coverage. Hockey, for example, we play NC State over in the RBC Center, which is where the Hurricanes play. We have a couple of games versus them, and they do really well. We can sell up to 10,000 tickets, between 5,000 tickets. So, I think on a regional level, yes. On the national level, some clubs have really put themselves out there, which creates a whole different set of challenges. I think for us is, now we have these sport club athletes are going out and representing the university, wearing the team gear. Now they're on television. So,
Right.
that's something that I don't think the university sometimes gets, that, we've got these athletes who are representing UNC, coaches who are representing UNC. They're on national television. They have an audience. So we have to be, I guess, more intentional about helping them prepare for that and making sure that they are representing the university and us and what we want them to, those values.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's just like technical stuff. I mean, and that's what's interesting. I mean, the NCAA sports, and again, some sports more than others are like bleeding into clubs. And in fact, sometimes I mean, once upon a time you'd have it more and then less, and now it seems like it's happening again. But like now, you'll see occasionally head to head. Like, I mean, NCAA team play a non-NCAA team. I mean, UNLV's club hockey team played three NCAA teams. They played the national champions, University of Denver, the University of Denver,
Wow.
for preseason, and then followed it up with some games with I believe it was Alaska Anchorage. So I mean, that's all televised. That's all. I mean, you're playing NCAA hockey basically, and you have to deal with the same NIL stuff, the same everything. And so that type of stuff, it might not be as big, obviously, as what the NCAA and Power Five football and then everything that follows that, but it's still something. Okay, it's not nothing. I mean, it's not a bunch of kids getting in a car and then getting some t-shirts and playing rugby, down at Wake Forest, on a weekend
Right.
in 1985. Like that's over, so, for better or for worse, so, and that's sort of the way it seems to have gone. And some of it's good. I mean, one of my previous conversations, and that was a discussion was about like some of the good things about like institutional control and having, the university run some of these things is just like liability. I mean, having kids driving a few hundred miles away in separate cars, while at the same time being a university program. I mean, how much can you really? It sort of has to be one or the other. It's, if it's either a university program, if it's not, or it's not, and if it is, it sort of needs to be up to certain standards in order to, satisfy even just the students. So they're paying, they're students there, they're tuition paying students, so that should kind of be expected. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think we still exist in this gray area, and I think we're a university sponsored program for certain things, but then there's also an arm's length distance on some other things. And I think our administration especially has tended to try to disassociate a little bit more as the programs have grown and become more formal. For example, we used to house all of their funds in university accounts, and now we've pushed a lot of that off campus, for better or worse.
what do you mean? Oh, so they have their own bank accounts with whoever they
Right,
choose? Okay.
exactly.
So
And we
who
still
decides that? Coaches or?
players, team officers. We do have some sport club administrators that help and monitor those accounts. And for continuity's sake and for oversight, they're listed on those accounts, but they're not housed within, the university. And a lot of it comes down to just lack of resources. I think, we still operate our sports club program with one, I would say 1.5 full-time professionals. We have 3 folks, but they also do our intramural sports as well.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we're up to almost 2,000 student athletes. We still have 50 clubs. So I think that's going to be the next big reckoning point, is to decide what is too big.
Right.
And I think we're there right
Yeah. Oh,
now.
yeah. Absolutely. And I think, and you're not unique. I think that's everybody. I mean, even, again, some of this stuff it's televised, say ultimate frisbee. I mean, I mean, does the NCAA program at UNC, are they like a Nike school? I forget. Nike or
We are.
Adidas? All
We
right.
are.
So, I mean, UNC Ultimates on TV, like, do they get to wear any apparel that they choose, or do they have to wear Nike? Like,
We don't, the Nike partnership doesn't extend to us. Unfortunately, we don't have any relationship with them. And everything, apparel, uniforms, all of that stuff is purchased by the club, and it's dependent on what kind of deal the club can negotiate.
so they can
Uh,
wear whatever they want
they can wear whatever they want, which once
with
again,
the
I think
UNC logo.
with the UNC logo, I mean, it's got to be approved by our licensing department.
Huh.
But still, that's something that once again, as they get higher profile, they're getting a little bit more visibility. I
Sure.
think it's going to come under more scrutiny.
Right, right. No, of course. How about like facilities? I mean, do you guys have any facilities that are specifically for intercollegiate club sports, or are intramural sports and um, intercollegiate sports basically using the same facilities? And also, are the intercollegiate club sports using some of the facilities that the NCAA programs use? How's that divided out?
It's a whole combination of all the above. So we have some dedicated fields that are only used for intramurals and sport clubs. But we also have a great relationship with athletics. We get to utilize their indoor practice facility that they use for football. The soccer and lacrosse practice fields, we have them in the evening so that our soccer and lacrosse clubs can practice on there, as well as our other outdoor clubs. We actually have the only university boathouse. It's our men's rowing boathouse, but so our women's rowing team, varsity sport, rows out of there. We share gymnastics facilities. We share softball. We are able to practice on their softball field. So it's really just a combination of trying to figure it out on a club by club basis.
Hmm. And then how about like just club sports? You know, I mean, what I'm hearing from a lot of administrators is that what they like about having these programs is that they're it like and like Division III sports, they're non-scholarship sports. I mean, you're paying to be there, which is good. And at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, again, t-shirts and drives to Wake Forest, but that seriousness and that institutional resources are draws for students to go to specific schools. So if you have a sailing team or you have this, I mean, that might be the difference between going to another school that's equally academic. If all things are equal, like, well, the one with the sailing team is the one that I want to go to. So I don't know what the breakdown of you. That's something I should have looked up. What the breakdown of out of state to in state students are in the general student population at UNC, and whether sport clubs have drawn a bigger even footprint, simply because those clubs exist. So what I'm saying is, if the student population is 50-50 out of state, 50% in state, but club sports has 70% out of state, I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about how important those club sports on campus are.
Yeah, so we have the legislature in North Carolina mandates that 82% of our students have to be in-state. So we only have 18% out-of-state students. But it is very true that a lot of because of our academic reputation, we have a lot of college athletes who could have played D2, D3, but they come to Carolina for the academics. And then we're fortunate enough to usually get them in the club sports setting. That's especially true for our soccer teams. I would say our women's soccer and our men's soccer teams are loaded with D2 and D3 talent. I'd say it's ultimate definitely is we've become a destination school. It's huge in the state of North Carolina, but it's a big draw for us. So all of those in-state students, that's a number one, or it's a deciding factor when they choose to come to Carolina. I think there's a few other niche programs that they do come to Carolina because we have certain sports, especially if they're looking to go out of state or even sometimes in-state to other institutions. But from a national perspective, I think once again, our hockey team will draw people down here from the Northeast. Once again, because of the academics, but knowing that we have hockey, we're more attractive to those students. To a certain extent, rugby is the same way, especially from our international students.
Is there a good chunk that are internationals playing rugby?
We do, yes, yeah. Both on the men's side.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, and that's the one thing. Like, I mean, whether intentional or not, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think that intercollegiate club sports, especially at big universities, UNC, Michigan, whatever, Virginia, are starting to compete with NCAA Division III sports. In some cases, they are like literally division, like in hockey. I mean, there are club teams. Rhode Island will play some of the small Division III schools in New England, and they will literally go head to head. And then of course I was speaking about like extreme examples before with UNLV, but like that talent level is bleeding over one another, especially at big schools like yourselves and smaller schools. And like you were just describing, New England and hockey in New England is institutional. So there almost all those schools had, not almost all, but many schools have, especially like the more noticeable ones, have NCAA hockey on campus. And so what that means is that that's a magnet for all the hockey talent, not only in New England, all over the US and even the world. So therefore what happens is the kids from New England are like, well, where's the opportunity lie? And opportunity seems to lie in the Sun Belt. So, the Yankee boys and girls are from Michigan are heading south, and it's just true. And so, it could be North Carolina, it could be Alabama's hockey team. They're chock full of kids that are from up north, and that's great because I mean, well, it's great for those states. A lot of those kids aren't going back. The parents are going to follow them down to retire, not the other way around. So And I think that's a real trend, and it's not just hockey, but that's like a very extreme and obvious example to me. If you look at any of those SEC schools, you guys, Wake Forest, NC State, and then all the way over, um, probably over to Texas. I mean, once you get to Texas, it gets brackish because then you get Western kids from Colorado and stuff like that, in California. But that northern Midwest and Northeast draw to the Southeast is real, and it continues to go on.
Yeah, my college roommate's from Boston, and he said all of his friends are sending their kids to Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, Elon, which
Yep.
is in North Carolina. I mean, so
Yep.
yeah, the mass exodus of students from up there to down south.
Yeah, and again, like it's not just because I mean, they're going to end up going down there anyways. The odds are, I mean, because that's the way the demographics are going. So, great thing to have a hockey team for all the people that are going to be coming on down,
Right.
or name the sport. No, that's great. Um, let's see. How about like sports accomplishments? I mean, you guys have a whole list. I mean, like you talked about, um, ultimate, and you have a great little video on YouTube. It's got like the banners. It's kind of cool, and it shows cycling and team handball. I didn't realize that women's team handball had a sort of a run there where they were very successful, which I'm very interested in as well, because it's an Olympic sport that the US is like MIA on and is pretty big globally. So that's very cool that UNC has that. And it's something that you don't necessarily need a special facility for either. You use a basketball gym or whatever. So it's something that could be developed and is developing in certain places. So like team handball, talk about them a little bit. I mean, how's that going?
Sure. We've had one of the oldest, collegiate team handball teams or programs, I guess, in the country. That kind of started by a professor in our exercise and sports science department. He was the sports psychologist for USA Team Handball, played himself, coached, and he started our program, I want to say back in the 80s, and just kind of created a culture. There never have been a lot of teams. Us and West Point have been basically on the men and women's side, the two longest standing and most successful programs. Other programs will pop up for a few years, and then as students cycle in and out, interests change. A lot of schools have fallen off, but yeah, it's an interesting sport. I think we're also very fortunate in that if you're an athlete, you can play a lot of, if you're an athlete, you can play team handball.
Yeah.
So what we get, most of our players on both the men's and women's teams had never seen or heard of the sport before they came to Carolina, and they were just looking to do something different. Maybe they were tired of playing soccer, or they didn't make the ultimate club or something else, and then they kind of find their way at a team handball. And so it's kind of a collection of just former athletes with all different types of skill sets, and we just got a lot of culture here and a lot of history around it, and there's a lot of good infrastructure within some of our alumni sticking around to coach and all that. So it's been a lot of fun. It's been really successful. I've learned a lot about it myself because I didn't know anything about it.
Do you have any foreign players playing?
Occasionally, yes.
Yeah.
I would say a lot more of those players that are just North Carolina kids that
Right.
Come into Carolina because they wanted to come here and then kind of happened upon handball.
Yeah, no, it's a great, I mean, and that's an example, and that's what I was trying to say earlier. I mean, you know, there still is opportunity for learning a new sport at an older age, whether it's ultimate or whether it's team handball versus, I mean, unfortunately, the barrier of entry, I mean, the odds are if you've never swum, you're probably not even going to make this the swimming club, right? Or have not skated, you're not going to be able to play hockey. It's just the barrier of entry skill wise is too high. But there are still those opportunities like team handball or ultimate frisbee where, again, like you said, if you're an athlete, you can make yourself into, a sports specific athlete for that sport, which is good because that's what once upon a time, many sports were. I mean, once upon a time, lacrosse, that's what lacrosse was, the team handball of 1982. I mean, kids picked up the sport after playing football or soccer, and then they were in high school or even later, and then that's where they started. And now, unfortunately, and this is what I see as a parent and everything, is that all this stuff like gets younger and younger and more professionalized. So it affects them. It affects the kids on the young end, but then it also affects you as a programmer because the expectations of the people coming in depend on how developed the sport is below it. So so those two things sort of play off of each other. The a lot of times the reason why certain sports are developed is because there are opportunities or college opportunities that exist. So, for example, lacrosse and field hockey are great examples. I mean, up and down the East Coast, there's plenty of lacrosse and field hockey. I now live in Michigan, and it's limited. And why is that? Well, it's because there aren't very many NCAA field hockey and lacrosse schools in Michigan. There's, University of Michigan has it for men and women, and meanwhile, those rosters are dominated by out-of-staters, of course. But that affects like what kids choose to play as a kid. Versus on the East Coast, there's a reason why more and more people play those things. It's because they had it at college, then the parents graduate, then they coach the kids who start at 6 when they start at 18, and then that cycle just hothouses itself.
Yeah.
So it influences what's coming into you, and it also influences what the youth sports parents and kids see around them. So at any rate, it's all the same thing. And in the end, I think what the deal is that all of these activities, it could be even non-sport things, like what kids do at such a young age is very specialized and high level. It's good when there are opportunities like those things, and people need to recognize those and see them as opportunities, which is kind of cool. But what else? The other thing that's kind of neat, like when I look on your club sports, is there's a lot of like fitness oriented sports too, because you have marathon, which obviously doesn't have a NCAA version. You get triathlon. Is there CrossFit? Is there that? You guys have CrossFit or like lifting, powerlifting, or anything like that?
I think there is a powerlifting club. They're not a part of our program. And I don't believe there's a CrossFit club
No.
Currently. They're definitely not under us.
Right.
But yeah, we do have some of those individual sports, cross country, triathlon, marathon club. I mean, I think that's the benefit of being in the South. We have pretty good weather, 12 months a year. So, we have a very active community too. So there's a lot of students that are out running, and those clubs are good examples. And I was going to say this earlier about a lot of our clubs is they're huge. They have, I would say, anywhere between 50 to 100 students, depending on the sport.
So this is related. So is there like a cut policy? Like, I mean, for club sports?
We don't have one. It's kind of up to each team. So obviously we can't have 50 hockey players, but for these other clubs that don't have as many space constraints or other requirements, then they can keep as many as they want. So what I think we've been really able to do a good job about is we've been able to have these either really large clubs of 50 to 100 people, and then a small subset of those clubs, which are really the competitive teams. So we have that in Ultimate. We have that in our like women's lacrosse, for example. We have that on our climbing club. I think we have 150 members in our climbing club, but we have about 18 or to 20 on our competitive team. Similar with our cross country, we probably have 75 to 100, but then only 15 to 20 of those individuals will go to the cross country meets. So the club set it up, and we help them set it up so it's structured a little bit differently in terms of what dues they pay, what fundraising requirements they have. what expectations they have around attending practices and those types of things. But I do feel like we do a good job being able to accommodate some of those individuals who say, hey, I never ran, I never did cross country in high school, but I want to try to do it in college. I want to try to find a sense of community on campus so they can become part of the cross country club, but they're not going out there to every single meet, having to spend all their time fundraising or practicing all the time, but they can still be a part of a group and an organization and once again, a part of a community.
Yeah, I mean, those individual sports, which are mostly like fitness based versus like a team sport, soccer, hockey, whatever. I mean, what's kind of nice is the talent level doesn't necessarily, or even the commitment level doesn't even need to match up perfectly. And if you don't have a space constraint either, that's great. I mean, plus you can collect the dues, right? It's like
Right.
Animal House, we need the dues.
Yeah.
So, like, so come all, and that's good for the club, and that's great. And that's what's challenging. Like again, hockey, you're literally on a fishbowl. You can only put so many out there. So the thing is, like, your dues are going to be dictated already sort of for you, and like what you can do with the unless you just want to raise dues, um sort of you're dictated to by what your travel and your ice time costs are, etc. Which leads to, like, I guess sort of sort of wind it down with this, or like the financial element. I mean, have there been any teams that have been exceptional in terms of fundraising or fishing sponsorships within your teams? I mean, like one thing that pops out at me is like bass fishing. You'll see it sometimes on TV on Saturday morning before college game day. You turn on ESPN or whatever, and it's like Mississippi and Ole Miss and whoever, and they're covered head to toe and Carhartt, this sponsor. I mean, it looks like pro fishing, and besides that, well, you can speak specifically to your own fishing, but also to the other teams. Like, have there any that have done a really good job of like finding third party underwriters to sort of take an interest in their programming?
Sure, and I think bass fishing is a good example. Cycling is another one. So that, sponsorship has kind of traditionally been built into those sports at every level, and we've, it's kind of filtered down to the collegiate level. We've been the beneficiaries of that, so it makes a little bit more sense. And there's some, there's just some history and precedent there. So yes, we have been fortunate on bass fishing and with cycling. Rugby, we've had some sponsorships in the past. Our rowing club does an excellent job working their alumni and really continuing to do outreach. We just hosted a 50th year reunion last year, and we had over 400 former rowers in attendance and raised almost $100,000. So, I think connections like that, and, I think Ultimate, for example, they're another one that has done really a great job of fundraising and getting community support. I think, once you win, it also helps too. So I think some of our more successful programs, they've attracted the attention of either former alumni who really had no affiliation with the sport, but they were just a Carolina grad. They've seen them on TV. They've heard about them. Their son or daughter has played, even maybe on a recreational level, not at Carolina, but they want to help support these organizations. So I think all of that kind of comes together. And I do think we probably only provide our clubs about 20% of their annual operating budget at most. And the other 80+% has to come from their own, fundraising efforts. And they do a really good job.
No, it's good. And one question that I just thought about that I should have been talking about when we were talking about like cutting and stuff like that, sort of going back. I mean, is there any bleed over from NCAA sports at North Carolina into clubs? So I'm talking about players that either were cut or were walk-ons or just didn't want to, and also vice versa from club to, I mean, usually it doesn't happen, but there's been some noticeable or notable exceptions. Rugby to football is one of them. A couple of Edelman, right? Patriots,
Yep.
Ohio State rugby to football. Has there been any I mean, mostly I'm interested in the NCAA to club. That's probably the way it's going to mostly go. But once in a while, it might be the other way. Can you speak to that at all?
Sure. I mean, we are the recipient of a few cases where either students have transferred in, say they played baseball at East Carolina and it didn't work out for them there, and then they wanted to come to Carolina because of the academics once again. Then they join our club baseball team, or we've had a few even North Carolina athletes who didn't work out, or they weren't getting the playing time they wanted, or didn't want the commitment of a D1 schedule, that they've kind of come and played for us and one of our club teams. I would say I think one of the coolest things that we have is Anson Dorrance and the women's soccer team here. He has always looked to our club program to find girls that get to play up and practice with the varsity team, and he will carry a huge roster and really allow those opportunities for our girls to kind of go up, practice with them some, but then come back and play with us. And there's always been a lot of fluidity between those two programs, and he's been a huge supporter of our women's soccer program. And we get uniforms from them, but the opportunities that those individuals get to play on probably the greatest women's soccer program of all time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sure. Mia Hamm and all the rest. And
Right.
yep, storied program. Absolutely. I guess I'll leave you with this. So don't take your whole morning. Two last questions. One kind of open-ended, one specific, and for personal use. First one, I guess. Where do you see club sports at North Carolina, and also generally going in the next 10 to 20 years? I mean, what changes do you, or if you can even see that far ahead? I don't know. Things might be moving too fast and to be able to have any sense of what it's going to look like in 10 to 20 years. But if you had to make a guess, what do you see for club sports in the future?
Yeah, I would say probably two things. First being, I think the large programs like ours that, we have 50 plus programs, those are going to shrink. And as these become more competitive and probably closer to what an NCAA, varsity program looks like, I think just from a resource standpoint, you're going to see smaller, more specialized programs with more limited opportunities, unfortunately, for the greater student population. I think you're going to see a continued emphasis in some of the preventative and sports medicine care. We started our athletic training program for sport clubs in 2008, and now we invest probably $150,000 a year in full-time, part-time staff, and that's rehabilitation services, sports medicine services, all of those types of triage and preventative injury or preventative care for our injured student athletes. So I think there's going to be a continued emphasis on that. Back when we started our program, there weren't a lot of schools that had it. You would show up to a game and there'd be no athletic trainer on site, or no sports medicine folks. And I think that's really rare that if you don't see that today. Most of these programs have started to invest heavily in that area. So I think that's just a good example of how the infrastructure around sport clubs is changing and is going to continue to change. So they just become more formalized. And then you mentioned this earlier, that kind of the educating the college parents these days are kind of stuck in athletics 1.0. I think that's also changing. I think that used to be a huge question for us, but now I think with the prevalence of kids playing year round in club, whether it's a soccer club, a lacrosse club, or hockey club or whatever, that culture is, these kids have been living that culture for 8-10 years before they get on campus, and they don't bat an eye when you tell them how much dues are, or they say the opposite, like, wow, that's really cheap compared to what they're used to paying. And then I think there's the students, they come in expecting to just continue playing and continue practicing 3, 4, 5 times a week. So, we used to have clubs that would only practice, once, twice, maybe 3 times a week. And now they're really pushing to practice 3 to 4 to 5 times a week. So I think once again, unfortunately, And I guess there's good and bad, but I think you're just going to see more professionalism in the club sport world, more formalization of these programs. It's going to be less focused on the recreational athletes.
Well, and on this point, like how many clubs, if any, play seasonally versus playing like basically September till the end of school? So I mean, is intercollegiate club soccer, I assume, is probably cutting off, and then but are they continuing playing in the winter and then playing in the spring? Or are they just grinding it out? And is there opportunity for multi-sport club athletes? And is if you are going to be a multi-sport athlete, which everyone pitches at the youth level, like it's obviously possible at the high school level, and certainly more possible at some schools that might be smaller or less like powerhousey. But if I would think, besides NCAA Division III, if there was an opportunity to play two pretty higher level club sports, is that a possibility at UNC and elsewhere?
It's definitely a possibility. It's less of a possibility now than it used to be. And you brought up a good point. I think when I first started, soccer would be in the fall, and they would really that team would be dormant in the spring. Right. And now you're seeing, hey, they'll pick up a 3 or 4 game schedule. They'll go to a couple of tournaments. You look at field hockey now; they have a fall season and a spring season. Lacrosse, kind of the same way. They're having a fall season and a spring season. So it's becoming more and more prevalent. These are year-round clubs. They're practicing year-round. They're competing year-round. So I think it's harder for athletes to get a break or to play another sport.
Right. All right. Well, I'll leave you this. It's almost holiday time. Where do you get your UNC Intercollegiate Club merch? I mean, if I want to get hockey gear, rowing gear, cycling gear, does it have to go through each club, or does the store sell any of this stuff? I mean, where can you get the gear?
It has to be through each club. So
All
each club kind of manages their own merch and team apparel, and it's all over the place. Some do a better job than others, and I think that's where you get to see the entrepreneurial spirit in some of these kids and what they can come up with online stores and social media and selling gear through there. But it's all up to the clubs.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, thank you very much for taking so much time. I mean, you guys
Certainly.
do a great thing down there. You obviously got a brand that everybody knows, and keep doing what you're doing. And hopefully, I'll have a product for you in the next year that I can share with you.
Yeah, I'd look forward to seeing it.
All
Take
right,
care
thank
and
you,
good
Mr.
luck.
Halsey. All right,
All right.
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.